Natural wonders of South America. When I was initially doing research on this, I just Googled that term and I found a list of 5 and a list of 10, 15, and so forth. And some of them were the same, some of them were different. And so I just picked them all. And I've got natural wonders, 24 of them. And so we're going to be going through this fairly quickly. Some of my presentations are sort of like taking a sip from a fire hose. That's what this is going to be like today. So let's go ahead and get started. The first of the natural wonders, Catatumbo lightning, the most intense and predictable lightning in the world. You'll notice where the star is. It's up at Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela. Lake Maracaibo is right there at sea level, very hot, very humid. The winds come down from the Andes Mountains that are just very, very close by. And let's see if we can do something about getting a little sound here. Okay, now I've got your attention. Okay, as many as 28 times a minute when the lightning is really flashing. Second of the 24 natural wonders, Angel Falls, the highest uninterrupted waterfall in the world. By the way, we're working from the north of South America down to the tip, to Cape Horn. And so Angel Falls are located in southeastern Venezuela. They're named after Jimmy Angel, an American aviator who was flying around that part of the world doing some exploring back in 1933. That's his airplane. And he came across this. Can you imagine? Uninterrupted fall of a half a mile. Nothing even close to that elsewhere in the world. The Tupui, House of the Gods. These rocks are among the oldest rock formations in the entire world. 1,800,000,000 years old. Now you might not have heard of the Tupui before, but if you've read Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, it took place on one of the Tupui. But if you haven't read that book, perhaps you went to this movie, Disney Pixar. Carl Fredricksen, the character who owned that house, tied all those balloons on his house to float on down to South America to find his hero, South American explorer. And he landed on one of the Tupui. By the way, Tupui, House of the Gods is the Tupui is House of the Gods in the local Indian language. And this is what they look like for real. Just magnificent outcroppings of, and I'll have to ask my friend Dick the geological origin a little bit of this later on, but I think most of it's sandstone, but the Ayuan Tupui is the source of Angel Falls that we were looking at a moment ago. And this one is 3 countries their borders meet at the top of this plateau. It rains virtually every day of the year. There's hardly any vegetation, some moss and some ferns and some scrub, but hardly anything. You can imagine, this is so high above the surrounding countryside. Caño Cristales, the most beautiful river in the world. Let me pause for just a minute. This program is full of superlatives. Some of them are objective. For example, the mountaintop that is the highest, that is the farthest from the center of the earth. It's not Mount Everest. You'll find out where it is in just a moment. So that's an objective superlative. Another superlative is the most beautiful river in the world. So that's more of a subjective superlative. And why do they call the Caño Cristales River in central Colombia the most beautiful river in the world? Because during certain times of the year, July to November, yellow, green, blue, black, and red aquatic plants grow in the river. And it is just magnificent. Absolutely fantastic. So that's the most beautiful river in the world. The Humboldt Current. It runs off the west, alongside of the west coast of South America. It's a very cold current, low salinity, and it just happens to be the source of approximately 20% of the world's fish catch. And I was thinking, we've had fish on the menu every single night. And some of those names of those fishes, perhaps we weren't familiar with them. I wouldn't be surprised if many of them came from fish from the Humboldt Current. But as you can see, the Humboldt Current veers out into the Pacific Ocean and is joined by several other currents, the Panamanic Current, the Peru Ocean Current, and so forth. You all can read them as well as I. And there are some islands there, and I'm sure you know which islands those are. The Galapagos. So this is another one of our natural wonders of South America, even though it's 563 miles off the land from Ecuador, it is still part of South America because it is part of Ecuador. The world's greatest living laboratory, because out there in the middle of that ocean, with all those currents coming together, isolation from other genetic pools, the various species evolved in really unique and wonderful ways. Galapagos, 18 main islands, 3 smaller islands. How many have been to the Galapagos Islands? Okay, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 5 or 6 people. It's on my bucket list. I would love to go out there. They have some interesting animals. The marine iguanas swimming around in the ocean, various sea lions and seals and so forth. I believe that's a frigate bird over there. And the name of this tortoise, this is probably the most famous tortoise in the world, Harriet. She was collected by Charles Darwin, taken back to England, and lived to the ripe old age of 175 years. You can imagine that. Really quite remarkable. And then they have, I don't know why they call this bird the blue-footed booby. For some reason, I have no idea where that name came from. But the blue is almost a neon blue. It's really quite remarkable. And again, I mentioned the Charles Darwin a minute ago. The theory of natural selection was based in part on his observations of the various species in the Galapagos. And as I indicated a moment ago, there are some very strange species. And we came across this one in a recent trip. You just never know what's going to happen when you're in isolation out there on the Galapagos Islands. Okay, Mount Chimborazo. I sort of teased you a moment ago. The point farthest from the center of the earth. Well, how can that be? We all know that Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world. So, this is how it can be. The Earth is not a perfect sphere. Polar diameter, 12,714 kilometers. Equatorial diameter, 24 miles more. So any mountain that's close to the middle of the Earth will have an extra 24 miles from, let's say, a mountain that's at one of the poles. So here we are. We have Everest. Here's the equator. Chimborazo is right, almost exactly on the equator. Everest is quite a long distance. So let's sort of make sense of this. Everest. This is the elevation, much more than Chimborazo, as you might imagine. Who's ever heard of Chimborazo anyway? But look at the latitude, 28 degrees north, 1.5 degrees south, so it's really close to the equator. Distance to the center of the Earth, Chimborazo is a bit farther than Everest. So there you go. Next time that's asked in Trivial Pursuit, you've got the answer. Chimborazo. And that's a picture of it. The Amazon River. I'm giving a lecture tomorrow on the Amazon River, and so I'm not going to say very much about it right now, other than to say that, as the captain mentioned the other day, the Amazon River, the outflow, the volume of water of the Amazon River is greater than all of the next 7 largest rivers in the world. 209,000 cubic meters per second. In other words, 8 trillion gallons of water per day.
No, it's more than that.
So I'll be telling you a lot more about the fauna and flora of the Amazon tomorrow, and the history of the Amazon. And also, I'll tell you about the time that a vampire bat landed on the pool deck of this ship. So you'll have to come tomorrow in order to hear that story. Lensois maranhensis, the world's strangest desert. So we're moving south a little bit, but definitely east. Right along the coast of Brazil is located this desert. I put it in quotes though, because although it looks like a desert, with dunes up to 130 feet high, spread over 580 square miles, it doesn't meet the definition of a desert, which one of the criteria is 10 inches or less of rain per year. This is a very, very different kind of desert, because when it rains, it creates countless lagoons. Now, how is that? You would think that it would just drain right through and there wouldn't be any water on the surface, just as if it rained in the Sahara Desert, there wouldn't be any lagoons. Here's the reason why. There are 2 rivers that flow near this location. Over the millennia, they've taken uncounted tons of silt and sand out into the ocean. The current running from east to west has blown the sand up on the coast, and during the dry season, when there are heavy winds blowing, the winds have picked up that sand and blown it further inland. Underneath the sand is an impermeable layer of rock. So the sand cannot drain, the water cannot drain away that it normally would in a normal desert situation. It's really quite beautiful. Those are people over there, by the way. Okay, the most beautiful mountain in the world. Now, how did it get that title? Apparently there was a poll of climbers, of wildlife photographers and so forth, and they all, well, not all of them, but most of them pointed to this mountain as the most beautiful mountain in the world. As you'll notice, it's located in the Andes, a little bit north of Lima in Peru. Almost perfect pyramid of ice, very, very steep. I can see why they would have chosen it as the most beautiful mountain in the world. Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world. And there it is down along the Peruvian-Bolivian border. In fact, if you go on the lake, you can go from one country to another, just continue from west to east. 12,507 feet above sea level. So it's much higher than any other navigable lake in the world. And it's, by volume, it's the largest lake in South America. My wife and I were on this lake, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, something like that, when we were traveling around Peru. And it is really if you have a good imagination, you can almost imagine that you're somewhere in Europe with all of those snow-capped peaks coming right down to the water. So these are my wife's pictures, by the way. We got onto a boat and went out into the water. Very, very clear water, very still. And along the way, we noticed growing on the sides of the bank of the channel that we were in, these various reeds, and we saw them being stacked up and drying, and we were wondering, what do they use these reeds for? Well, apparently, there's a tribe of Uros Indians who live on 42 floating islands in the Lake Titicaca. And this is a cross-section of the island. As you can tell, over the years, the reeds deteriorate and sort of float away to the bottom, and they have to replenish periodically with new reeds on top. So they're forever building up their island at the top as the bottom falls away onto the bottom of the lake. Very, very interesting way of life. And it's really sort of a unique experience to be on that island and feel the island move. That's their life. They're on these islands all the time. Cotahuasi Canyon, the deepest canyon in the world. So it's a little bit to the south and to the west of Lake Titicaca. So this is a picture of it, 11,000 feet deep. So I would expect what you're processing in your mind, well, how does that compare to the Grand Canyon? I've been to the Grand Canyon, it can't be that much deeper. But it is. It's almost twice, not quite twice as deep as the Grand Canyon. So you can imagine, what an amazing sight that must be, to stand on the edge of the canyon and look down. There's something like 12 different ecosystems because depending on the altitude, different plants and animals grow. The Pantanal is located along the border of Brazil and Bolivia and Paraguay, the world's largest tropical wetland. So I came across this aerial photograph, satellite photography, and it's a little bit busy. During the dry season, this is a picture taken during the dry season. And you can see the rivers flowing like this. Disregard these black lines, they're for another purpose. These are the rivers flowing, and there's sort of a wet marshy area here. But during the rainy season, the whole area transforms into a tropical, an aquatic paradise, really. We have a good friend who's a very learned botanist, and he said, if you want to see the animals of South America, go to the Pantanal. This is what the Pantanal looks like during the dry season and during the rainy season. Depending on the rainfall, 54,000 to 75,000 square miles gets inundated, and the whole ecology changes. During the dry season, you wouldn't see any water here. Salar de Uyuni, located down in southwestern Bolivia, the largest salt flat in the world. Now that really sounds exciting, doesn't it? Oh boy, largest salt flat in the world. What's the big deal with that anyway? So, here's the big deal. Over 4,086 square miles, the elevation varies only up to 3 feet. Can you imagine that? It's probably the flattest place of that size in the entire world. It's a salt flat. You can see the salt there. But one really interesting thing is that it distorts your field of your perception, your visual perception. And people take some really strange photographs. These next few photographs were not photoshopped. They were just taken at different, the people in these pictures were different distances from the camera. Really strange. That would be sort of fun. I think people go there just for the purpose of taking these funny pictures. Now, during a couple of months of the year, it does rain quite a bit. And so these salt flats that are very, very flat are covered by a certain amount of water, maybe a couple of inches. And it creates some of the most beautiful photography opportunities in the world. It's like a mirror. There's no wind blowing, and the ground reflects the sky in a most remarkable way. The most colorful lake in the world, Laguna Colorada. That means colored lake in Spanish. Right there in the very southwestern corner of Bolivia. It's very, very red. Now it's not pollution, but rather sediments in the water that have washed down into the lake, as well as some of the algae apparently create a red color as well. Those are flamingos, by the way. I don't know that I want to go swimming in that lake, but it sure is nice to look at. The white deposits are borax, a very commercially important mineral that's used in detergents and cosmetics and enamel paints and various things of that nature. The Atacama Desert, the driest non-polar desert in the world. The driest deserts in the world are at the poles. I was surprised to find that out. So what causes this dryness to occur in the northern, very northern part of Chile? Mountains and wind. Here's the Atacama Desert. The prevailing winds, laden with moisture, are coming from the east. They hit the Andes Mountain and drop all of their water over here. So there's a rain shadow on the other side of the Andes Mountains that's very, very dry. Annual precipitation, 0.04 of an inch in many places. And in fact, there are some places where they haven't had any rainfall in more than 400 years. So this is a very, very desolate environment. In fact, it looks like the surface of Mars, doesn't it? And in fact, that is why it has been used by NASA to prepare for various missions outside of our way off in space. This is a prototype of the Mars rover. They figured that this kind of landscape would replicate most closely the Mars landscape. And this is the Mars rover on Mars. Looks a little different, but it was tested in the Atacama Desert because of the similarity in the topography and the environment in general. Now, in the Atacama Desert, it's the very best place in the world to observe the stars. And I realize that in Hawaii also there are some very magnificent observatories. There are two large existing observatories in the Atacama Desert currently, but this is called the McClelland telescope. It will be open for business, theoretically, I think something like 2021 or thereabouts. It's a perfect location for observatories because of the high altitude, dry air, and lack of light pollution and cloud cover. And when this telescope is up and operating, it will have 10 times the resolution of the Hubble telescope. And we've been so amazed at the pictures that have come from the Hubble. I can't wait to see what the pictures from the McClelland telescope would look like. The El Tatio geyser field. Here we are, we're down, still in Chile there, up in the northeastern corner. This is the third largest geyser field in the world. Number one, Yellowstone. Number two, Siberia, somewhere in Siberia. And number three, El Tatio. El Tatio in the local Indian language means the oven. As you might imagine, 80 active geysers. very, very beautiful and dangerous as well. Iguazu Falls. I was talking with someone the other night about their visit to Iguazu Falls, and you notice it's plural. It's not one fall, but many. The most beautiful waterfalls in the world. And this is definitely on my list. Awesome place. I think that I definitely will end up there someday. Mount Aconcagua, located along the Chile-Argentina border, a little bit on the Argentina side, the highest mountain outside of Asia. And in fact, it's the highest mountain in both the western and the southern hemispheres. North and South America, the largest, and also the largest south of the equator for the entire world. 22,837 feet. One really interesting little fact about this very, very tall mountain is that it's the tallest non-technical mountain in the world. Well, what does that mean? It means on the north face you can climb it without picks, without ropes, without all the kind of equipment that mountain climbers need for most of the very tall mountains of the world. Apparently, the slope is so gradual that they are able to summit this mountain without all of that equipment. I expect they still do need oxygen. The penitentes, bizarre snow formation. As you can see there, they get as high as 16 feet. That's not quite the height of these. But in certain altitudes, certain environments, when the dew point is always below freezing, it creates these bizarre snow formations. Now the term penitentes means the penitent ones, the ones who are repenting, the ones who are trying to be humble themselves in a religious way. Apparently it's based on some religious orders have this very tall hood associated with them. And I think, as I understand it, that's where the term originated, because these ice formations reminded people of the pointed hood of certain religious orders. The fjords of Chile. Look at it. It looks like Swiss cheese almost. Here are the Andes Mountains right here, and all of these fjords, as you can imagine, those fjords stop highways from being built north to south. Chile is a very, very long, narrow country, and there aren't hardly any roads in this part of the country because you have the Andes on the right and the fjords on the left. I understand that Holland America has a number of cruises that go into the fjords.
Yeah.
That would be a wonderful cruise to take, I think. In fact, speaking of Holland America, there we are. I don't think that's the Princeton, but I couldn't blow it up enough to see the name of the ship. As you can see, it gets right up close because of the steepness of the mountains coming out of the water. The Southern Patagonia ice field, the world's third largest reserve of fresh water. The first one being the polar ice fields, the second largest being the Great Lakes in the United States, and the third largest being this ice field. And again,
Canada.
I'm sorry?
Canada.
Oh, thank you. I am corrected. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I will remember that. Thank you. So we looked at this a few moments ago when we were talking about the Atacama Desert. It's the same idea, but in this case, down here, where the Patagonia ice fields are located, the prevailing winds are coming from the Pacific Ocean. And there is a rain shadow on this side of the Andes, but in the Andes, it has formed this magnificent ice field, which is the third largest ice field in the world, located in the United States and Canada. I've got to imprint it in my mind. Okay, 48 glaciers. A couple of years ago when I developed this lecture for the first time, it was one of the few areas in the world where there wasn't a lot of retreating of the glaciers. In fact, the Petit Moreno Glacier, which we see here, was, at that point in time anyway, one of the few glaciers that was actually becoming larger. Torres del Paine, South America's most beautiful national park, located right down just south of the ice fields that we were looking at, down towards the tip of Chile. It is just up and down, 4 seasons in one day. Look at that, isn't that magnificent? My word. Photographer's dream. The marble caves of Patagonia. Again, this is a subjective superlative, the most beautiful cave network in the world. So let's take a look at it. It's right on the border between Chile and Argentina. I think it's a little bit on the Argentina side because this is an Argentine general here. The waves of Lake General Carrera have eroded a peninsula of solid marble. And this is what it looks like. Can you imagine getting into a kayak and going in there? That would be really great. Okay, we have about 2 or 3 more. The Strait of Magellan, singular, folks, not straits. I was always raised that it was Straits of Magellan. It's a strait. And it runs right through there. 350 miles long. I'm going to be talking about a little bit about this when I talk about in the age of exploration, when I talk about Ferdinand Magellan, because he is the one who discovered them, in 1520. Very well protected, very, very deep. As you can see, one of the largest warships in the world was able to sail through the Strait of Magellan, sheltered from rough weather and high seas. Has anyone sailed through the Strait of Magellan? Wow! Goodness gracious! Marianne, we need to do that. No question about it. More than half of you. That's wonderful.
South American cruise.
South American cruise, okay.
You get the fjords too.
Yeah.
Okay.
You get the fjords.
Well, hopefully they'll ask me to lecture on that cruise. And if not,
That was a good cruise, wasn't it?
okay. Tierra del Fuego. In Spanish, Tierra del Fuego is land of fire. And apparently when Magellan was sailing through the strait, the Indians had a lot of fires going. I don't know whether they were signal fires or cooking fires or what, but apparently there was a lot of smoke that he observed as he and his crew were going through the Strait of Magellan. Over in the Tierra del Fuego, there was a lot of fire. And so he called it the land of fire. Subpolar oceanic climate, short cool summers, long wet moderate winters. And as I understand it, the winds are very, very strong, and they go in one direction. And so, of course, the vegetation is pointing in that direction. When I saw this picture, I was thinking, Lord of the Rings. This would almost be a perfect setting for Lord of the Rings. It looks mystical. Cape Horn. Now, I think I got a pretty good education growing up as a kid. But I always thought that Cape Horn, it was called Cape Horn because it looked like the Horn of Plenty. And Cape Horn was right there. No, it is not. It is actually the bottom end of an island south of Tierra del Fuego. And this is what it looks like. This exact point here is the southernmost point of the United States.
No, South
Of the
America.
United States, my goodness. South America. I think I'm having hunger with pains or something. South America, my goodness. But how did it get that name? Well, there is a place in the Netherlands called Hoorn, and that was the home port of a ship called Hoorn, and that was the first ship to double the Cape. In other words, go from east to west and west to east, which is a pretty good trick for a small, clumsy ship, because that is one of the most treacherous places in the world to sail a ship. Below 40 south, there's no law. Below 50 south, there is no God, someone once wrote. Because it's where the Southern Atlantic and the Pacific and the Antarctic oceans all meet. And it's apparently just very, very rough weather in that area. In fact, they estimate over 400 years that people have been sailing around the Horn. Over 1,000 ships have gone down in this very small area because of the very unpredictable, turbulent weather. And that concludes our talk today. It was a little bit shorter than most, and I will be happy to entertain any questions that you might have about this or any of the other lectures that I've given.